Hello, my friends, and welcome to a short version of the Mr. Constitution Hour. Normally, I am here for a full hour, but not today. I've got a doctor's appointment later on today, so we're going to keep it at 20 minutes. That's probably about the amount of time I need to say what I want to talk about, or rather than my usual Christian Constitution kind of themed shows. I had something happen this week that I wanted to talk about, and I thought this would be a nice place to do it. And a lot of the people that are in this audience were probably there on Tuesday when I had my moment. And so I want to talk about that. I have been watching this rise of anti Semitism, this rise of anger about Israel. I had a person not too long ago in the comment section of one of the shows say I'm being too easy on Israel and blah, 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 blah. And so I wrote an article recently about that attitude, that thought. And so first I'll go through that, and then I want to get into what happened on Tuesday, or at least try to. I've always been one that has always decided it was important to stand firm with Israel. I'm a Christian. And that's always been my position. I know that there's a lot of criticisms. There's, the mainstream has gotten to us. I don't know. And I mean, in the modern political conversation, the criticism for my steadfast support of Israel is becoming more common. And so one commenter on one of the videos suggested that modern Israel isn't the biblical Israel, and that my support is misguided. And this perspective, while increasingly common, misses the whole profound theological, prophetic significance of Israel's restoration consistently emphasized from Scripture. At the heart of this debate lies a fundamental question: does God's covenant with Israel endure despite their disobedience or questions regarding the genetic purity of the Israelites in modern Israel? As I've often expressed, the relationship between God and Israel mirrors that of a father and a child. When a son is disobedient, the father doesn't disown him. A father's reaction may include discipline, or one that allows the son who refuses to listen to find his way, but the father's love and protection remain. And so it is with God and Israel. And when it comes to Christianity and this replacement theology idea, a parent doesn't have a problem with their child, adopt a child, and then decide that the original child is no longer their child and only the adopted one is. That's ridiculous too. And so J. Vernon McGee, I listened to, I've gone through the Bible with J. Vernon McGee once before. My wife and I are doing it now. We're, I don't know, about 6 months in. J. Vernon McGee powerfully affirmed this truth. He noted that Israel is God's chosen people. He is going to bring them back to their land someday in faith and belief. They are returning to the land today in unbelief, and they do not have peace. This is the evidence of the hand of God in the affairs of the world. This observation perfectly captures the current reality. Israel's restoration in our time is itself evidence of God's faithfulness, even if they haven't yet returned in faith and belief, as McGee notes. The establishment of modern Israel on May 14th, 1948, stands as one of the most significant prophetic fulfillments in history. As Greg Laurie emphatically states, when the Jews formed their nation on May 14th, 1948, a modern-day miracle occurred. More specifically, a prophecy was fulfilled, and the prophetic time clock began to tick. This isn't mere political history, it's divine providence unfolding. Pastor Jack Hibbs, Chino Hills Calvary Chapel, I've been there a number of times. I've met Pastor Hibbs a couple of times. Last time was I had sponsored an event last year that he spoke at, and sat at the same table with him. We talked for a good 20 minutes, and he reinforces this perspective, noting that never before in history have events come together in such a way, and that these developments remarkably align with what Scripture has already foretold. Hibbs specifically points to Israel's restoration as a primary example of this prophetic alignment, highlighting how the biblical question, shall a nation be born at once, Isaiah 66:8, received its dramatic answer in 1948. The commenter's suggestion that modern Israel should be called Judah rather than Israel reflects a common misunderstanding. While the biblical kingdom was indeed divided after Solomon's reign, with the northern kingdom retaining the name Israel and the southern kingdom known as Judah, the prophetic restoration promises always envisioned a reunited people. The prophets consistently spoke of a future regathering of all 12 tribes, not just Judah. This regathering began in 1948 and continues to unfold. And as Jack Hibbs boldly declares, if you look at Israel beyond or being restored as a nation and say that's not the real Israel, the implication being clear that such skepticism contradicts the prophetic reality. Critics often point to Jesus' words in John 8:44. He addresses certain religious leaders saying, "You are your father, the devil." As J. Vernon McGee explains in his commentary, this was directed to specific individuals who were opposing Christ, not to the entire Jewish people or to Israel as a nation. McGee consistently maintained that Israel remains God's chosen people despite individual disobedience, a pattern evident throughout biblical history. Beyond the theological arguments, there exists a clear biblical imperative to support Israel. In a commentary titled The Prophetic Books, J. Vernon McGee explains that the Bible contains hundreds of prophecies that have been fulfilled literally, demonstrating that these men were speaking the words of God. This literal fulfillment includes the restoration of Israel, which stands as one of the most prominent prophetic signposts of our time. Jack Hibbs has dedicated significant attention to Israel and biblical and Bible prophecy, recognizing it as a central theme in understanding God's prophetic timeline. His teaching emphasizes that supporting Israel isn't merely a political position, but a biblical one, aligned with God's redemptive purposes for humanity. And as I reflect on these truths, my support for Israel deepens. We are witnessing the unfolding of prophecy before our eyes, a modern miracle that confirms God's faithfulness to his covenant promises. The existence of Israel today, despite ongoing conflict and opposition, testifies to God's sovereign plan. Like Greg Laurie, I recognize that the prophetic time clock began to tick in 1948, and like Jack Hibbs, I see the remarkable alignment between current events and biblical prophecy, and like J. Vernon McGee, I understand that Israel's current state of unbelief doesn't negate God's purposes. Indeed, their restoration and unbelief is itself evidence of God's hand at work. And to those who criticize this support, I would gently but firmly suggest they reconsider the biblical evidence. The restoration of Israel isn't a political accident, but a prophetic necessity, a fulfillment of God's promises that demands our recognition, our prayer, and our support. And as we watch events unfold in the Middle East, may we remember that we are living in prophetic times. Israel's existence, survival, and challenges all fit within the biblical narrative that points toward God's ultimate redemptive purposes. To stand with Israel is not to agree with every decision the nation of Israel makes, or to agree with all of their political officials, but to stand with God's prophetic plan. And that's a position I'll maintain without apology or hesitation. Which brings me to my situation that popped up on Tuesday. For those of you who follow me, I broadcast a number of times during the week on a number of different places. I'm a radio guy, so my broadcasts tend to be long. This 20-minute thing today is probably going to be the shortest video I've done in ages. And I was on the air with a friend of mine on his channel. And it wasn't a good look. The anger in my face was unmistakable. I've been, had my own issues this week. I had a friend of mine who's a pastor pass away. Matter of fact, a few days ago. There's a lot of other things on my plate. Now, no excuse, just saying. And when I was a young man, I was an angry young man many decades ago. Let's put it that way. But in my more mature years, I have found peace in the Lord in ways I would never have understood as a young man. Yet here I was on Tuesday, red-faced and shouting expletives at someone I considered a friend for many years. Now, I have since stopped being angry about the situation. As a Christian, I prayed for guidance and that the Lord directed my anger into a productive response instead. And I will admit the anger is what has made me want to do some writing about this very topic. That article I just went over with you being an example. And to be honest with you, after being red-faced and angry, I was immediately embarrassed. But the damage had been done. The relationship may have been irrevocably harmed. I don't know. I haven't talked to my friend since. He hasn't contacted me to apologize, and I haven't contacted him to apologize. It's now been 2 days. I decided at the time that I was finished with this particular host and that we would no longer perform broadcasts together as a result. The jury is still out on how solid I am on that decision. His religious views, in my opinion, are poison. And the Bible warns us against close binding partnerships and corrupting peer pressure. 2 Corinthians 6:14 tells believers not to be unequally yoked with non-believers. 1 Corinthians 15:33 states that bad company ruins good morals. Proverbs 12:26 advises that righteous people should choose friends carefully so they are not led astray. This does not mean Christians should completely avoid people of this world. Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 5:9-10 clarifies that we need to go out into the world. Jesus famously ate and spent time with tax collectors and sinners, modeling engagement rather than isolation. We are instructed to be kind, peaceable, and patient, treating outsiders with respect and love. Colossians 4:5-6, and Titus 3:2, which makes my relationship with the friend in question all the more harrowing. He is a Christian in the sense that he believes in Christ and that Jesus is the Messiah who shed his blood on the cross for the sins of humanity. But he is also a preterist, the follower and follower of replacement theology. He's written books about his preterism and replacement theology point of view and chastises me for not being willing to read them. But my response in my mind has always been the same. I don't need to take a taste of arsenic to know it's not good for me. The episode I became angry on occurred online shortly after I had completed my 15-year run as a terrestrial radio host. At the time, I was in the process, and I still am, of migrating all of my programming from AM/FM radio to online platforms. This program on Tuesday is a little different. It's a different part of my broadcasting portfolio. It developed a few years ago after I had been interviewed on a popular online show. The audience wanted me to conduct an online class for them. So this friend of mine who was connected to the popular host I've been working with had the idea of starting Constitution classes on his video channel. So I agreed. But it is his channel. I have been a guest each week. I was on a platform that wasn't controlled by me. After going through the Constitution 3 times on his channel, we decided to begin a series going through U.S. history. And that material for me would be right out of my book, A Promise of Truth Self-Evident, Part 1, Early American History. I have 12 books under my belt, and I'm working on the rest of my True Self-Evident History series and a few other books right now. And this particular friend who hosts this show on Tuesday that I directed my anger towards had once been a student of one of my classes, one of my live classes. For 16 years, I taught Constitution classes across Southern California, with 7 classes per week at one point. We originally met at a gun show. I mentioned I taught classes at the time we met, Temecula and Corona, and he wound up attending them. And he had a few ideas that teetered on the edge of conspiracy theory, but I've always believed that people are entitled to their own opinion. And I have a few unorthodox ideas of myself when it comes to when it comes to the mainstream way of looking at things. I tolerate differences of opinion, or at least I try. And in fact, I derive a certain level of enjoyment from debate sometimes. I like those conversations sometimes. I've always particularly excelled at U.S. history from the discovery of America to the antebellum period. So those discussions were the most entertaining for me, to say the least. So this host in question, on a number of episodes, revealed himself to be very critical of Israel. He believes in replacement theology, which in a nutshell says that Christians replace the Jewish people as God's chosen people. And he is a preterist, which believes prophecy, particularly end times prophecy and the second coming of Christ, was fulfilled in the first century, primarily with the destruction of Jerusalem, should I say, and the Second Temple. So, and the scattering of Israel. In my views, my views, I've always made them clear what I believe. His views have always created tension, but I've always refused to allow him to get under my skin. But during the conversation in question last Tuesday, I had just finished a series of discussions over the previous few days of people calling Israel genocidal because of their response to the October 7th attacks, along with other attacks on Israel and Jewish people. I was not in the mood for the host anti-Jewish and anti-Israel comments going into the episode, but I didn't really know how much I felt that way until the conversation took that turn. While quick to temper as a young man, I believe in my older age I have developed a calmer manner of debating that may come close to mirroring the style of the late Charlie Kirk. I ask questions to gauge my opponent's ideological stance, level of knowledge, and then I go from there. I could typically debate nearly any topic with a calculated, calm demeanor. But for some reason, the rising tide of anti-Semitism and attacks on Israel, and perhaps also my emotions being high because of the loss of my pastor friend a few days ago, filled me with anger that was explosive inside. And it came out when I believe my friend added a straw that broke the camel's back. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was him pushing farther than I wished. Even after I told him I did not wish to go farther on the topic at the time. I've prayed about it. I understand that Satan's methods include hitting us at our weakest spots. I am a passionate person, so I often raise my voice a few octaves when debating. There's times on the programs I do over at Patriot Soapbox where there's a person in the chat room say, "Hey, Doug, stop yelling." I'm not yelling. I'm up a few octaves. That's what I do sometimes. But when I went off on my friend's broadcast on Tuesday, it was way beyond a mere display of intensity. I was spitfire angry. Now, Jesus was angry when he threw the money changers off the steps of the temple. So my attitude has always been that anger itself is not a sin. The sin can be what you do with that anger. Sometimes a sin is not the action, but the motive behind it. It's not a sin to eat, but it is a sin to be gluttonous. Anger is similar. Anger is a natural part of the human experience. The question is, do we react or respond when faced with an angry situation? Which brings me back to my angry situation on my friend's broadcast. Red-faced and shouting expletives, and ultimately clicking the end button on the screen to exit the show without returning. And the host was having difficulties with his camera, and I had technical difficulties, and he has had technical difficulties often. And I joked maybe it was one of his cats. He said I was probably right. And another friend, War Hamster, was on with us. And Brady and I began talking about Alexander Hamilton and Jefferson. I had a show that's no longer available, and so I offered to him that we do a show on Jefferson and Hamilton. And then our our host, he said something about how he thought that sometimes he thinks that Hamilton gets a little bit of a bad rap, and I disagreed. Say, man, he started the whole problem. And then he says, well, you know how he was raised, do you not? And I say, yes, I do. And he says, well, how was he raised? And I said, he was the son of a merchant. He wasn't born on the coastal colonies. And then the host says he was raised under a specific religion and it wasn't Christianity. And there it was. The host found a way to stick his anti-Israel, anti-Jew belief system into the program. And I was sick of it. He had gotten to the point where he was inserting this garbage on just about every episode. And considering the week I had had with anti-Semitism stuck in my face at every turn, I reacted. I said, if you're going to play the Jew game, I'm going to get really ticked off at you. Brady the War Hamster tried to redirect the conversation, but I continued. Talking about Hamilton. I didn't go with the Jew conversation. I went with Hamilton. And we got it back on Hamilton. We talked about Hamilton. But the host brings it back up. I want to ask, why would you be angry at that I brought that up? Brady said, brought what up? No. Why would Doug be angry that I would mention that? There's a whole book out there, The Jewish Origins of Alexander Hamilton. He was basically born an orphan. He was taken in by this very wealthy guy, and they were Jews. And I replied, as an individual, he made his decisions. That aspect is not what made him what he was. People always go, it was because of the Jews, and I don't want to hear it anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm sick and tired of hearing it. And it went back and forth for a little while. I'm going to save you the discussion and the expletives and all that jazz. And 4 times I told him, I really don't want to talk about this right now, right here. We can have this discussion another time. And then he goes on to say, well, you know, there's a distinct behavior when it comes to people who claim to be Jewish. And I know because my father dealt with it for 20 freaking years. They lie, they steal, they cheat. But they don't do it to each other. They do it to everybody else, and it's okay. And that's what it says in the Talmud. But I'm not saying it's the Jews. I used to, but I don't anymore because I recognize that there's something bigger, and it involves all kinds of creeds and races, blah, blah, blah. It's not the Jews. The Jews is a lazy argument. I'm like, well, you just said it is. And now you're saying it isn't. And then he says, you want to know where Zionism came from? Now, Zionism, in my opinion, is Israel having a country. But the word Zionism has been turned into another ism like fascism. And that's how it's treated. And so that's how he was angling when he said this. Well, you know where Zionism came from? To put the Jews of Jewish descent into Palestine. Well, there was no such thing as Palestine. Palestine doesn't exist. It didn't exist. That originated in 1840 in England by Christians. Like, you know, it's all our fault that this happened kind of attitude. And I said, no, it originated with God's plan. Now, remember, this guy is a preterist. Prophecy means nothing to him. He disagreed with me. I said, hey, it was prophetic. And then he said, all right, I'm going to stop because you're either going to get ticked off or I'm going to get ticked off. Use a different word. I said, I'm already ticked off. Then he kind of pushed a little bit more. And I hung up. I couldn't take it anymore. The anger I felt that day wasn't a moment of a lost temper. It was a righteous indignation that mirrored God's own heart for his chosen people. As I reflected on that explosive moment, I realized my reaction stemmed from something deeper than mere frustration. It was a spiritual response to a spiritual battle that has been raging for millennia. The Apostle Paul warned us in Romans 11:25 that we should not be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Yet today, much of the church is indeed ignorant, not just of this mystery, but of the foundational significance of Israel and God's redemptive plan. When we read our Bibles, we are reading God's word through the hands of Jewish prophets about a Jewish Messiah who came to fulfill Jewish covenants and establish a kingdom that will ultimately be centered in Jerusalem. My friend Waleed Shabat once told me that we forget that the Bible is not a Western book, it comes from the Middle East. As J. Vernon McGee often reminded his listeners, the Bible is a Jewish book. To separate Christianity from its Jewish roots is like trying to grow a tree without roots. It may look green for a while, but it has no foundation. Hi, Dobie Dave. The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. We cannot fully understand the new covenant without first comprehending the covenants God made with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and the people of Israel. These aren't just historical facts. They're living promises that form the very framework of our salvation. Dave, I'm glad you're here. Unfortunately, it's a short show day. That's why it's titled 20 minutes, and I've already gone too long. I've got a doctor's appointment to go to. But I appreciate you being here, and anybody else that shows up. This was not my normal show. It was a response to what happened on Tuesday, my explosive response to a friend of mine's, in my opinion, anti-Semitic position, although he won't see it that way. And I appreciate you spending the time with me. Dobie Dave, if you just now tuned in, go ahead and go back and check out the whole thing. It's not too long, as you noticed. It's 27 and a half minutes at this point. Appreciate all of you. Hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, whatever it is, YouTube or Rumble. This plays on both. Share the links. And don't forget, I've got a new book out. Please check it out. And if you want to see my new book, the link is in the summary of this video down below, navigation2liberty.com, or go to Amazon and look up The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump by Douglas V. Gibbs. And I've got 2 or 3 other books I'm working on right now, so be on the lookout. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for spending the time. We'll see you next time. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. Visit me at douglasvgibbs.com. Bye-bye now.